So how psychedelics went from counterculture to grind culture. This is one that you brought to me that I thought was an interesting choice. Mm-hmm. So why do you want to discuss this article?
This is yet another vestige of really contemporary culture that I don't think people are talking about enough. Like what you right under barely subconsciously understand that, okay, great, 2024, there's this weird dichotomy that we have so much more knowledge about nutrition and health, yet people are generally more unhealthy than they were 30 years ago.
Yes.
Little odd, right?
Very strange, yeah.
And I don't think people talk about that quirk very much. Another one is the revolution in psychedelics over the last, like I said, 10, 15 years, and its cultural place. That a lot of the culture around psychedelics that we remember from the 20th century was from the baby boomers experience in the 60s, where this whole generation of people that didn't even smoke weed, all of a sudden from 1962 to 1968 went from barely having a drink and had skirts at their ankles to running around naked in fields and pumping themselves full of LSD, right?
Yeah.
And it was thought about as very psychoactive, hallucinogens, and okay, great, we put that in the drawer and folded that nicely into the 60s and 70s, and then people stopped doing it in the 80s and 90s. And even into the 2000s. 2010s and 2020s, there's been a psychedelics revolution. People are doing this both more recreationally and in social activities. It's more, of the party drugs. People do psychedelics. And like 1995, like the big partiers weren't doing, oh great, let's do some ketamine. That's not what they were doing. But it's also intersected strangely with achievement culture, and the most prominent names or people that are very much, entrepreneurial focused, and some of our more notable entrepreneurs are kind of advocating and been part of some of the advocates of the psychedelic revolution, and that microdosing or casual use of psilocybin or ketamine or LSD or even some stronger stuff is now kind of threaded into the kind of hustle bro entrepreneur tech guy culture, and I don't think people talk about that. It pops up every once in a while when you get a tragedy story like Tony Hsieh, who, and this is happening a lot, right? Like, person gains independent wealth, is freed from all material concerns, has a big exit, and then starts wearing beads and male robes and going to music festivals and doing way too many psychedelics and gets lost in the sauce.
Burning Man culture.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you want to call it music festival culture, Burning Man culture, but a lot of it's okay. The kind of reputation in the 60s is that the slackers did that. Now, the most type A achievement-based people are embracing this culture. And I think that's what that piece was about. And I think that's really interesting in that, the real high achievers, the only one that people ever really looked to was Steve Jobs. The only guy who was super successful in business, but was also kind of associated with psychedelics was Steve Jobs. And, that's why he was, at least the story was that he was so unique in design respect, and that he had these experiences doing God knows what in, an ashram in the Himalayas for a couple years before he came back and became a computer developer. And now it's everybody. It's most guys. It's, once again, you go contrast to recent eras. In 2004, someone gets rich. Do they become the Burning Man guy? Very few of them did. These days, go see who becomes the Burning Man guy. Who's doing all psychedelics, or who's advocating for microdosing and and kind of incremental ketamine and psilocybin use. Or, okay, great, let's all go do a psilocybin. We'll take the team for a retreat and go do a psilocybin ceremony. Like, you're seeing that a lot. It's not a fringe thing anymore.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Now, these compounds are not without their respective risks, but what are the purported benefits of some of the more commonly used ones, like psilocybin, for example?
Sure. The people may have blockages in connecting with themselves. If you want to get really woo-woo about it, that you can't connect with your heart, you're stuck in your own head, or materialistic, and you feel senses of appreciation, love, and connection that you hadn't in your day-to-day existence. It's almost like when you haven't meditated for a while and you like, oh my God, I've been clenching my jaw for the last 36 months straight, and similar benefits of that regard, that there's aspects of your brain that were lying dormant and are now stimulated. So they're definitely, I'm sure you've had people on these, well, indulged, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Both yourself personally and had people on who have discussed, some of these topics.
Yeah. Well, I've always been extremely conservative with mind altering substances. And it wasn't until my mid 30s that I decided to experiment with low dose psilocybin.
Me too. I'm glad I was in my 30s when I started doing that stuff. Yeah, for sure.
Because your prefrontal cortex is fully developed. I think at that point you kind of have, hopefully you've been able to assess your relationship with potentially addictive substances. I don't think psilocybin actually has that much addictive potential, but yeah, so I started to dabble with low dose psilocybin, and I found it to be an incredible creative lubricant, for lack of a better term. In fact, my very first experiences with low dose psilocybin, that was around the time when I began writing Genius Foods, which I think is it's a book that. It's a book that obviously has.
It's an achievement. It's an achievement in that field of study.
Yeah,
and creativity. It's
achieved material success, but it also is a book that I think part of the success that it's achieved is due to the fact that it talks about these ideas in a really easy to digest way, and I credit many of the passages in Genius Foods to when I was dabbling with these substances for the first time, and I was out socially. Doing so, and I was talking about the science, which I love to do. I'm a big evangelist for the science that I write about, and I would find new creative ways of articulating the science that I was later that night going back to my Word document to write about, and some of those metaphors and analogies that I came up with while under the so-called the influence of low dose psilocybin have made their way into the book.
Yeah, and lots of people point to those types of experiences, and similar to other drugs that some people advocate for, weed, it just sometimes just chills you out, sometimes just gets you in a more relaxed, positive frame of mind and lets some stuff bubble to the surface, or cleans out the subconscious. And I think a lot of people, and that's part of what has been driving this revolution over the past once again, everyone said people were not doing nearly as much psilocybin, chocolates, ketamine, LSD up until about 10, 12 years ago. There's absolutely been a revolution in this regard.
Yeah, what do you think has been the driving force for that?
I've been trying to think this through. A little bit of it is the music, right? And the drugs, and we've seen from throughout the ages, drugs and music have a bit of a symbiotic relationship. And as music became more electronic and less vocal and more instruments and electronic based, that works better with some of these psychedelic drugs. That all this music festival culture, the music festivals had to happen, right? The
EDM.
The EDM that funnels. These drugs funnel into that, and that music funnels into these drugs, and there's better symbiotic relationship there than classic rock or hip hop, right?
Yeah.
So that's one factor.
That's for sure.
Right. I think the way that the economy works, and that a lot of people got richer a lot quicker this century than previously. Gary Vaynerchuk is like, listen, I was coming up. There weren't any startups in the 80s and 90s. There were just a couple people who were really technologically oriented. There was no internet. You weren't going to just come up with a new brand and launch it off the internet and go raise a $700,000 seed round and go launch your business. That was not possible. So a lot of people were freed from material concerns at an earlier age, and were then looking for higher attainments of consciousness. And a lot have looked in this direction. So once again, that's also chicken or the egg. Is the hustle culture and the business culture in the digital era more conducive to doing psychedelics once you've already achieved something, or does it just make more sense if you're not sitting behind a desk all day and you're out there being adventurous and creating something, that you're more likely to do psilocybin than to not do it? But I think those two factors are definitely at play. And from there, who knows? The fact that people stood up music festivals all over the world, and we live in a more globalized, connected society where the option to go and travel to a far off land to a cool music festival, and these are probably drugs that you want to be doing if you do that, it's just more opportunity. I think those are all factors.
Do you think that these drugs might one day we might see what's happened in the cannabis industry, the fact that now it's essentially maybe not at the federal level, but Here in California and certain other states,
Oregon, I believe.
Yeah, you can buy cannabis products super easily.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly headed that way. I mean, it's drifting from black market to gray market. Will it get as white market as cannabis? I think probably not quite, because it's more impactful. You don't want people going around, on ketamine and psilocybin all day long. And something we haven't talked about is just like the benefits. And a lot of the people that are that's the only I don't deny the benefits. The problem is some of the people that are advocating the benefits are denying the burdens and the risks. And it's coming back to bite some people, because there's a couple people that I know that have got caught up, that thought they were doing a real positive found a real discovery in doing psilocybin and ketamine, who got lost in the sauce and then started spinning out. And it's more than a couple people. And once again, if you believe it's nothing but potential benefits, the chances of you getting lost in that increase exponentially. And so I think I think there will probably be, kind of natural and societal antibodies to it becoming as widely used and widespread as cannabis. But it's going to incrementally become more prevalent and more legal, for sure.
I also think a lot of people, possibly mistakenly, see them as a shortcut through the real work that often needs to be done with regards to mental health.
Absolutely.
Seeing a therapist, for example, working through issues. A lot of people now will, you hear reports of people, even in our peer group, taking trips to Peru to go on these like ayahuasca journeys, and they come back and they claim to have had, the veil lifted, from their eyes, but I'll often encounter the same people 6 months later, and they're
doing
the same
it again.
Or doing it again, or they're essentially the same people.
Yeah, you see a lot of that, and maybe, and I'm just noodling here, is that the positivity or the high from some of these discoveries are getting reconnected with an emotional center might elevate them temporarily. And it's not false, it's not bad, but it might distract you from some stuff that you're keeping under wraps. And that going, you don't have it all figured out.
Yeah.
Maybe you have a little bit of it figured out.
Yeah.
So like, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, and be like, okay, great. I'm going to be a little more attuned to my emotions and a little more sensitive, and not get lost in the minutia of day-to-day life anymore. But you can't ignore the things that are happening, over here, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G issue that, is going to catch up to you one of these days.
Yeah, they're not a replacement for doing the real work. They could be an adjunct therapy, and certainly like in the right set and setting. I mean, there's all kinds of really crazy and super positive research coming out of sites like Johns Hopkins University, NYU, I know is using these compounds in the setting of PTSD, major depression, even helping people get off their addictive tendencies like smoking, alcoholism, and the like. So it's super exciting, but but again, all of this research is being done in a very specific set and setting, which I don't know is being replicated in these more sort of offshoot experiences.
Yeah. And going back to the original topic, I mean, it's like strangely now intertwined with business culture. And I mean, me and you, we're talking about it here a little bit as kind of passive observers of, hey, this is interesting, but I don't know. We'll have to see how that story ends. I mean, this could be, however many, some of the people that might be advocating for corporate retreat to go out to the woods and, take some mushrooms. I don't know. That could go very wrong. We'll see.
It could. Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.